community collaboration. Empower community collaboration toward ending homelessness, and fosters an effective system of homelessness prevention and intervention in the greater Indianapolis area. We firmly believe that everyone has the right to be housed and connected to care, and that the only way we can achieve this is by working together, because successful efforts towards ending homelessness requires the collective talents, resources, and commitment of the entire Indianapolis community. No one group or individual has the ability to address these issues alone, as we are much more effective and impactful when we bring our collective talents together under a shared vision. These lunch and learns are meant to provide some insight into the issue of homelessness in Indianapolis, as well as a highlight the collective work that's being done by our amazing partner organizations working across the home system. You will hear from several of them today, which I'm really excited about. Before we jump into this topic and meet our phenomenal panelists, I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank our 2021 celebration sponsors, as you can see on the screen. Thank you for your commitment to ending homelessness in Indianapolis, and we appreciate you immensely. It cannot do this work without you. Today's topic is one that I'm sure we wish was not still relevant. It's breaking the cycle of family homelessness. No child should be without a place to call home, yet far too many children and families are staying in emergency shelters, struggling to find adequate, affordable housing choices in Indianapolis. For these families, their housing crisis impacts everything else: the ability to focus on school, employment, stabilizing healthcare, maintaining relationships, and even building social capital. Staying in shelter may mean families are separated, further adding to the trauma of housing loss. One of the biggest predictors of homelessness in adults is a homeless experience as a child. Addressing family homelessness is vital to breaking the cycle of homelessness for so many, and has significant impacts on the other areas, including education, health, and economic stability. This is the reality for far too many individuals and families experiencing homelessness across the country and in Indianapolis. In 2020, 8,502 individuals experienced homelessness in our city throughout the year. On a single night in January 2021, our point in time count counted 1,928 people who were staying in emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, or living unsheltered. Those experiencing homelessness are disproportionately Black and Brown households. Increasingly, those are over 62, and those who have chronic health conditions. Today, we will hear from those working to reduce family homelessness and with lived experience in Indianapolis about the strategies, opportunities, and challenges in realizing the vision that everyone has the right to be housed and connected to care. Now, let's meet and hear from our phenomenal panelists today and learn more about them. So each panelist will be able to introduce themselves with their name, organization, and position. What area within the homeless response system does your work fall in? What populations do you work with most? And what or who inspires you? So we will start with Erin Brown and go in order.
Hi, I'm Erin Brown. I'm the Education Director of Shelter-Based Services at School and Meals. We're a nonprofit in the education sector, but we are not a school. We work with all populations of students. They could be an emergency shelter, transitional shelter, permanent supportive housing. In the schools, we work with students in the schools, so might not be in shelter at all. And then I would say, what was the last question? I'm sorry.
Who or what inspires you?
I'm so sorry. I would say the parents that we work with probably inspire me the most. I mean, it's hard to be a parent anyway, especially during COVID. But working with these parents are probably what motivate me, inspire me every day.
Hi, I'm Crystal Hazlitt. I am the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Liaison for the Metropolitan School District of Washington Township here in Indianapolis. Every school district is federally mandated to identify a McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Liaison who has responsibilities to identify students experiencing homelessness and help remove barriers. So that is what I do and who I work with. And then who inspires me, for sure, the young people that I work with, but I would also say, as a woman of color, the women that have come before me in my school district and in my family are certainly my inspiration.
Veronica, you can go next.
Hi, I'm Veronica with Family Promise of Greater Indianapolis. I am the program manager for shelter. We generally is an emergency shelter for families. The population we generally serve is all different types of families, big and small, all different family makeups. And the last question is what inspires us, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What inspires me? I would like to say all the families inspire me that we work with. Their uniqueness, their drive, and just understanding that different families need our assistance for various reasons.
Dr. Merritt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Merritt. I am the Chief Health Equity and ADA Officer for Indiana Family Social Services Administration, also known as FSSA. So in that role, I am charged with I'm leading our Office of Healthy Opportunities, which oversees social drivers of health for folks across the state. We serve upwards of 2 million people, as well as understanding how to reduce inequities in terms of policy provision for people we serve. So in terms of homeless response, we definitely fall into, again, thinking of a very macro perspective, meaning that we are more in the social services response system as well as healthcare. So we serve across multiple divisions, including Medicaid, SNAP or food stamps, childcare, disability, mental health, and addiction. So falling across a variety of buckets that people experiencing homelessness would engage. So we serve any and all of the populations that folks have already mentioned before, including families as well as individuals. And I think, kind of echoing Crystal, inspiring me would be definitely a lot of my family elders and folks who have dealt with much more than I have in moving forward with a lot of the work that I do in the pursuit of equity. So thanks.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Lafayette, it's your go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katherine Lifeite. I am a researcher, a public health researcher at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. And so I do a lot of research on evictions and how they affect children's health and development. So I don't work on any specific part of the homelessness response system, but I'm focused on sort of transitions to homelessness. In particular, my research deals with children and how children are affected by housing insecurity and evictions. And I would say that I'm inspired by service providers like many of you, and also the families that manage to survive and thrive against all odds.
Thank you. And our last panelist, Ms. Crystal Norris.
Hi, my name is Crystal Norris. I'm almost 40 years old. I have a beautiful 16-month-old son, and I am in day spring shelter right now. So I'm actually experiencing the homelessness and the issues that go along with all of that. And honestly, what inspires me? My son. He has helped me to become a better person. And being here has also helped me become a better person. So I appreciate all of it.
Thank you, Crystal. And I just want to say thank you to our panelists who have introduced themselves, and we are ready to get started. But before we just really start, I'm going to do a quick exercise. If everyone can just close their eyes, close your eyes, everyone, and take a deep breath. And just use your imagination for a moment, or maybe this is your reality. Think about a time when you were hungry. Were you able to grab something really quickly, or did you not know where your next meal was coming from? Think about a time where you had nowhere to go. No home, no shelter, no family. Did you simply just get a room at a hotel for the night, or you slept in your car or crashed at a friend's house? Think about a time where you had to decline a much needed raise at your job because you know you will lose out on your benefits. Think about a time where you didn't have the transportation or couldn't obtain your ID card, social security card, or even your medical documents. You can open your eyes and breathe now. This is just a small glimpse of what families are experiencing being homeless, but not limited to. At this time, we will start our panel discussion, and just want to let everyone know that this will be a real conversation. Nothing is rehearsed, and we're going to get started. So what comes to mind when you think of the word family? And every person can answer this question.
For me, it's not just blood. It's about the people that you've chosen to be your family, because sometimes some of us don't actually have family that is there for us. So to me, it's a group of people that you choose.
I would, excuse me, I would say the people who raise you, the people you grow up with, and then also like what Crystal said, the people that you choose to be in your life and surround yourself with.
And there's no particular order, we can just go. Go ahead, Crystal.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'll add just words like connection and, you know, sometimes good and sometimes bad times, people that you go through life with that see you maybe at your worst and also at your best and all the things in between.
Yeah, just to echo everything other folks have said, I think sometimes family is biological, sometimes it's not. I think it's really just the kind of social network that props us up and the folks that support us in life.
And this is just putting a fine point on what everyone's already said, but I think that it just varies from individual to individual. I think people that one person might consider to be in their family, that same person might not consider themselves to be in that person's family. So I do think that building on what everyone already said, but that it's diverse with respect to even how each person views who they consider to be in that group.
And I agree 100% of what family actually means, because everyone has a different definition. It could be your neighbor that is a part of your family as well. And it looks like someone, Veronica, you want to go, so I'll let you speak now.
And just to piggyback off everybody, to me, family means togetherness. It means a unit. It could be a mom, a dad. It could be a grandma, a grandpa, aunt, a non-blood relative, or friend. As long as you define it, it's yours.
Thank you, Veronica. So our next question for the panelists is, what are some unique needs of families experiencing homelessness in our community?
I can start from just purely from the educational lens and side of things. I always feel like Indianapolis, and I'll probably say also I grew up in Indianapolis and spent just a little time outside of Indiana, but not a lot. So certainly don't have the perspective across the country, but from what I can kind of gather, it feels like in Indianapolis, we're certainly designed in a way that there are several different school districts within Indianapolis. And I think that's kind of unique. And one of the things that makes it difficult for parents and families to navigate education for their children, especially if they're transient, the fact that you can move across the street or and be in a different school district can be really overwhelming. And the fact that you could find potentially stable housing, but maybe not in the area of Indianapolis that you're used to or that you feel is your community, that's also incredibly difficult for parents and families. And so I think that's something that I see from my lens as unique in this community for families experiencing homelessness.
So I don't think this is super unique to just Indianapolis, but the fact that, especially coming from a state perspective, that there does tend to be a mix of barriers and opportunity depending on where a person lives, because Indianapolis, as we know, technically is Marion County, but we also have a metro area that includes many other counties. And so kind of this push and pull between what the city deems to be important and worth investing in for people experiencing homelessness versus what the state does. And that sometimes there can be legislative decisions at the state level that, you know, could preempt something at the local level, that there seems to be kind of a constant, you know, back and forth, that whether it's social services, whether it's health, whether it's housing, that all those types of decisions, there's kind of a constant kind of push and pull behind, you know, what actually can go forward to improve families' experiences.
I feel like one of the most unique needs I see families experience that come into our shelter is immediate need for childcare. It's a huge component. Most families need childcare in order to get employment, and how CCDF sometimes works is you can't even get CCDF unless you already have employment. So just having that conundrum and having to work around the system to figure out how families get such a basic need as having somewhere to keep your child while you're at work is such a huge component in Indianapolis.
That's one of the things that I was going to say as well, is the childcare is a big issue for us in the shelters, because, you know, we have to have our kids, at least in this shelter specifically, you know, our children are with us all the time. And sometimes we don't have people outside of the area to watch our kids, or, you know, while we run a simple errand or something that our kid can't go to maybe. And so that's a big deal. And like Crystal said, as far as like moving outside of your comfort zones, that's another thing, because, you know, a lot of the housing and stuff is in areas that some people might not want to move to. And so it's a struggle, because you either have to give up the comfort of living somewhere that you're really comfortable with, or, you know, you live somewhere where you're a little uncomfortable, but you have a home. So.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing their experiences and in terms of what families experience being homeless. So our next question is, what does support to a family look like? And anyone can answer this question.
For me, I think it's different than the other panelists. For the kind of support I offer is through research and advocacy instead of hands-on support.
I can talk about what School and Meals does. So we provide one-on-one tutoring for families that are living in the shelters. So the kids might come down after or before dinner and sit with a volunteer tutor that works with them on homework and skill building. But then we also work with the families on the back end in terms of educational advocacy. So that might be making sure that they're aware of their rights under McKinney-Vento, making sure that they feel comfortable communicating with their school where their students attend. If they don't have a school yet for their child, making sure they feel comfortable choosing the school that best fits their family. So we work a lot with families on that. And we also have a school-based program And that is also tutoring as well, but also a big push toward making sure that the families feel connected with the school community, which a lot of our families don't. So we want to make sure that there is that connection.
And I'm going to piggyback on Erin and say what it should look like from an educational perspective. Certainly does not always happen. But what we should be striving for in education, K-12, is we should be connecting, like Erin said, with parents and children experiencing homelessness. We should be ensuring that children can get back to the school that they were attending when their family was permanently housed, as a way to avoid educational interruption for them. We should be ensuring that children have access to free lunch and textbook assistance. And we should be ensuring that they not only are receiving the same educational opportunities as their permanently housed peers, but that we are identifying and addressing the gaps in their education and putting in services and supports to assist in terms of those educational gaps. That is what it should look like. And certainly it does not all the time, but that's what we should be striving for in K-12 education.
From the state lens at FSSA, our job is to meet the variety of different needs. I think we've all kind of alluded to the fact that homelessness just isn't about housing, right? It's about childcare, it's about employment, it's about transportation, and a variety of other factors depending on the family involved. And so FSSA serves the entire state. And again, our goal is to meet a variety of those needs, especially for families who are in vulnerable situations, including housing instability or homelessness. So kind of echoing what Crystal said about what the system is supposed to be, ideally you should be entering, we have our Division of Family Resource Offices in every county across the state. So you should be able to go in there often and get connected with different types of social services, including things like SNAP or TANF, but then also being connected to Medicaid and healthcare coverage. If you're a pregnant mother, for example, right now, you can definitely get that and get it for an extended period of time. Similarly, being connected to our Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services to provide workforce related needs, especially if you're a person with a type of disability or other type of condition. And then our Mental Health and Addiction Division focuses on, as the name implies, people who might be suffering from a substance use disorder or a mental health condition. And so collectively, each of our different divisions addresses different parts of a person's experience. What we're aiming to do is to make and streamline those different areas to be more effective, so that if someone is coming into a space where they need one or potentially more of those and don't know that those options exist, that we can do a better job at kind of meeting all of those needs collectively instead of having to kind of scatter across multiple spaces to get that support.
Thank you, Brianka. This question is going to be from Ms. Crystal Norris. As a person with lived experience, what has been your success story? And if you don't have a success story, what would you want your success story to look like?
I actually kind of am a success story. The day I came to the shelter, I was an addict. I was addicted to pain medication because I had had my C-section. I had had a hip replacement. And so I got addicted to the pain medication. The day I came here was the last day I used. I've been sober 6 months and 6 days as of today. And also being here, I have gotten my Section 8 with help of Miss Laura, my case manager. And I am so thankful for her because she has helped me with that. She has helped me with my anxiety issues. I'm glad to have her on my side.
Thank you, Crystal, for sharing. And to our organizations, what is one story that you can share about one of your clients on their behalf?
I can share really quickly about a young man that I worked with at the high school. It's been several years now, but I share this as a success story because I think it really just illustrates the resiliency and the strength and courage of young people experiencing homelessness on their own. So he was 17 years old when he was asked to leave his home, and still in high school, and was working but really a lot of hours to try and just take care of himself. He finally came in to my office at the high school and said to me that there was no way he could continue to maintain attending school and also working like he was to be able to take care of himself, because he had to work a lot of hours. And so he ended up leaving high school, and then later taking the test, the high school equivalency exam. And while a lot of people might not see that as a success because he did leave high school, what I really saw in him and what I appreciated was his courage to come and tell me. We had a connection and we worked together. He didn't owe me that. He didn't need to do that, but he did. And he made a decision that he felt good about and that was right for him. And then he finished high school when he had time to do that, and has been in the military and is now just living on his own independently and taking care of himself. And so I think it really illustrates the importance of connection, but also the fact that individuals and families, they don't owe us their stories. Crystal, thank you so much for being here and being willing to share. So I just appreciate the fact and the courage that it took for him to be able to do that.
Thank you, Crystal, for sharing. Does anyone else want to share before we go to the next question?
I can talk. We really, when the pandemic hit and we were not allowed to go into shelters in person, that was really hard for our program because that's what we do. So it was a struggle to kind of figure out how we could still support our kids and our families. And so we did what we could virtually. We did a lot with making sure that our families had the access to the technology that they needed, which was actually really difficult for a lot of our families, despite the fact that they may have been given a device at school, but getting connected is a completely different thing. But we had one family that we met at one of our emergency sites, and because of the virtual learning aspect of it, we were able to stay connected with them after they left the shelter, and we continued a virtual tutoring program with them for the rest of the school year. And so we worked with the student after, he'd do his tutoring after school, and then mom would hop on to the Zoom and talk with the coordinator who was working with the student. And I mean, she'd come on and say, I'm really struggling with childcare. Do you know any options? And then so, we'd do some research with her and work with her on that. Or she'd say, I don't know if I can get food this week. So we talked to her about the IPS food pickup sites. So it was something where we could connect still virtually from, which was very difficult, but we were still able to connect. And it actually, a family that we probably wouldn't have been able to stay connected to as easily in a normal time because they were at an emergency shelter and they left. We were able to still connect with them through the rest of the school year and kind of help them through that transition.
Thank you, Erin. So our next question will be, how can we address the underlying issues of trauma? And as we know, trauma is a person's emotional response to a distressing, experience. So what are some ways that we can combat that issue of trauma and just, practicing trauma-informed care with our families?
I think one issue we've talked about internally is, especially as we talk about racial equity in housing and homelessness and trauma related experiences, is the fact that a race isn't really centered in a lot of trauma informed care discussions. And so when we talk about overcoming barriers that are there through systems that disproportionately affect people of color, there are a lot of folks who are trained in trauma informed care also aren't trained in talking about those inequities that exist. And not just due to race, like race is definitely a primary factor, but related to a lot of things that are very systemic, whether it's sexual orientation or many other factors. And so how do we move those conversations, not just meeting folks on issues of SUD, SCMI, et cetera, but really talking about the social context in a way that I don't think a lot of trauma-informed care conversations have really led folks to think through how do we break up some of those systems more meaningfully, and how that affects individual experiences and family-related homelessness in particular.
Out of suburb.
Right.
He was like, you know, this basically like, I mean, I'd like to.
And everyone mute themselves if they're not speaking.
5 rounds of interviews, and he's like, you done any like assessment stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I got some assessment stuff I did.
So for me, as being in the shelter, where we're talking about, you know, being able to talk to somebody, for me, it's being able to connect with the residents here. And I know with COVID, it's really hard for us to be able to get together. But by sharing with the people, the residents that I've become close to, it's kind of helpful with that, because we share our stories with each other, so we can help build each other up. And that's really important, to have the people around you, especially when you live in a shelter, the people that you live with, to help support you. It helps tremendously. It really does.
Thank you, Christu, for sharing. Does anyone else want to answer the question? All right, so we will move on to our next question. As we know, poverty remains as a widespread. I'm here in Indianapolis, and you know, housing is overcrowded and access to healthcare continues to be inadequate. What are some ways families can access healthcare? And I'll pass this on to Dr. Merritt to answer first.
Okay, well, I think it's not a loaded question, but there are lots of ways to answer that. So I think most directly and tangibly, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that people, one way to access health coverage through the state is to go through one of our local offices. We have online pages as well that allow people to see if they're eligible for healthcare coverage if they're lower income. And so they can either visit an office physically, they can apply online to go through that process. However, even though that is something that, first of all, requires you to be able to physically get to an office as well as to potentially have internet access, you know, it can take a while for people to actually get coverage once they apply. So it can take up to, you know, a couple months to get that coverage. So even if you're applying and you need help soon, it doesn't usually happen super quickly. And then that also, I think someone also mentioned the point of, I think it was you, Siobhan, in your intro, about how people can quickly lose their eligibility depending on, you know, where they might fall on the income spectrum or how much they might pay monthly due to that. So even though you can access healthcare coverage through the state, online or in person across any office across the state, that the actual process can be complicated a little bit and can really deter people from getting the support that they need. So it's not that healthcare isn't accessible for folks who need it. It's a question of how accessible it is. And so that's definitely something that I think our agency is trying to work on. We've also tried to create some ways to make those applications, make them a little more accessible to people so that it's not quite as overwhelming when they're trying to sign up for healthcare benefits. But yes, that would be the primary way if you are Medicaid eligible, is to check that eligibility and work with some of our folks wherever you might live or online to help determine and help you work through some of that process to make it a little easier for you.
Thank you, Dr. Merritt. Does anyone else want to answer that question before we move on?
Having the HIT team, the song is from the Salvation Army. We have the HIT team come like once a week. A HIT nurse, and that's very helpful coming to the shelter. So maybe applying that more is helpful, and she helps them get applied for Medicaid and HIP and things like that. She helps them set up for vision appointments and things like that. So I mean, I think that's very helpful for our clients as well.
Yes, I was actually going to add that. So thank you. That pretty much if you are, at a shelter or working with an organization that serves people who experience homelessness, and those folks are also very skilled and very well versed in how the system works. So it's not like you have to always go through all these other systems through the state. That usually those folks are very well aware and can be really supportive to families who might need connections to those services.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sonia and Ms. Bianca. Our next question will be, what are some barriers that are keeping families from taking advantage of affordable housing, even when it's available? So for example, the vouchers that we've been working on for the past few months. So if anyone would like to take on that question, that would be great. All right, so let's hear. Okay.
I was going to say, I think Veronica's trying to say something, but.
Could you repeat the question?
Ms. Sonia, this is for the panelists. We'll do questions and answers towards the end.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I think some barriers are that, like we were saying before, Miss Bianca, or I'm sorry, I can't, name's not right. Merritt, Dr. Merritt, I think. It can get so complicated, the process or like the paperwork to fill out. If you don't have somebody helping you, you can misinterpret things, or you write the wrong answer down because you don't understand the question. And then of course, you're either denied or you have to go back and redo things, and the process starts all over again. And it can definitely be overwhelming. I know from experience. But also the other thing is like I said before about the areas, certain areas where Section 8 or vouchers are accepted aren't necessarily the greatest areas. And so that deters people from actually using their vouchers because they're afraid to move to those certain places that are available to them.
I'm gonna say one thing we know from national data is that even when people have a housing voucher, oftentimes it's difficult to lease up. And one factor that plays into that is that landlords often participate in what's called source of income discrimination. So they're not supposed to deny anyone housing because they're paying with a voucher, but it happens. And we know that it happens everywhere. It's widespread. And it particularly applies to renters who are Black, Latinx, and other people of color. So there's a sort of a policy ways that we can put more teeth in the regulations and punish landlords that are doing this. But I think that's definitely a factor. So people end up sort of using the vouchers where people will accept them, which isn't necessarily where they want to live.
Thank you. As we wrap up eventually, I have a couple more questions. And this will go to Ms. Crystal Halstead. So are children who experience homelessness more likely to be homeless themselves? And I know I stated this in a statistic earlier, but just wanted to know, have you seen that as an experience?
Yeah, Charbon, I think the generational poverty, generational homelessness definitely applies. Not necessarily that, if a young person experiences homelessness, that means they're going to experience homelessness as an adult. That certainly is not the message or the case, but certainly we do know that youth and young adults who experience homelessness have a higher risk of experiencing homelessness as an adult. We also know that, not getting a high school diploma certainly does also contribute to adult homelessness as well. And so obviously, education certainly is a pathway in order to be able to sustainability, to housing stability as well. And so I certainly don't, not that, like I said, not that a young adult or a youth that experiences homelessness as a child will, but we know that there are protective factors. We know that there are things that we can do now to help try and to avoid that as an adult.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. Does anyone else from the panelists would like to answer that question? All right, so we will move on to the next question. I'm actually going to give this to Ms. Katherine. How does social policy improve population health equity to prevent evictions?
Right. So when we talk about social policies, there are, housing policies, things like the eviction moratoriums last year, emergency rental assistance, right to legal counsel in rent courts. Those are all social policies that directly prevent evictions or improve access to affordable housing. Section 8 is another policy like that. But then there are also policies that we can think of as housing policies, even though they're not housing policies. Things like Medicaid expansion, unemployment insurance, children's tax credits, all those things put money into the pockets of renters that they can put towards rent and then help avoid evictions. Because there's structural racism in housing markets, job markets, elsewhere, Black and Latinx families have disproportionate risk of eviction. So social policies, if they're designed well and implemented equitably, should benefit those families especially. So then any health benefits of those programs should be concentrated in Black and Latinx communities. And so they should ideally improve health disparities. What we see though oftentimes is that's not the case, and that there's inequitable access to these programs. For example, a lot of the emergency rental assistance money that's out there on the table, we're starting to see evidence that white families are the first ones to get those money, even if they're not the ones with the biggest rental debts. So there's a lot of work to do in sort of tweaking these social policies so that they get to the people that need them the most, and then actually have these intended effects of improving health among the folks that need them the most.
Thank you for that. And this is for Ms. Crystal Halstead. As an educational entity, and also Erin as well, as an educational entity, what are some strategies that we are using for families specifically?
Do you want to take that first, Erin?
Sure. So, I mean, some of the things that I've already mentioned before, making sure that our families feel connected with the school community is really important for us. Making sure students and families are knowledgeable on their rights and services provided to them under McKinney-Vento is really important. Once again, additional one-on-one support, educational support, skill building during our tutoring sessions. And then educational goal setting is something that we find is really important as well too. So making small goals toward things that are helpful to move, whether or not it's something along the lines of improving a educational skill like learning math facts, to making sure that they feel comfortable once again talking to the school. So that's really important for us. But being connected to the school community and feeling comfortable in the educational environment, I think is something that we really stress.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then from the school district kind of perspective, I think one of the things that we can do and improve upon is just continue to connect with community organizations in our community that are serving young people and families experiencing homelessness, like School on Wheels, Outreach, IYG, Family Promise, and others. And to really connect with them, understand what their services are, and then ensure that we are having those be accessible to parents and to young people. And I think the other thing that we can continue to do a better job of, we say, we talk a lot, and you've heard Erin use that term in terms of the community partnership with parents. We do want to connect and have a partnership with parents. And so I think on our end as schools, we've got to invite in student voice and choice and agency. We've got to invite in parent voice, and we've got to be willing to listen to that and actually allow that feedback to impact our policies and procedures.
Thank you both for answering that. And the last question we have is, as a community, what can we do to help advocate for families who are experiencing homelessness? This is really a call to action of how we're going to move forward once this Lunch and Learn is over. And everyone can answer that question on the panel.
One thing I would say is that right now Congress is voting on the big Build Back Better Act. So housing is actually a big component of that bill. So if you can call your reps and tell them to vote yes on that bill. I saw that Indiana is due to get 6,000 more housing vouchers. So that could certainly help with homelessness in the state. And then there's also kind of these policies, states have been kind of slow to get emergency rental assistance out. And in the meantime, a lot of landlords are filing for evictions. So I think we need to press local, state, and even the national government to build in sort of off ramps to evictions. And by that, I mean, we need policies that say you can't file for an eviction, you can't kick someone off of out of their house if they have a pending application for emergency rental assistance. So make sure that people are accessing that money and staying housed so that we don't get a huge wave of evictions and folks entering the homeless system.
I think building off of Katherine's point, just kind of those peripheral social policy issues. I think Crystal Norris mentioned, childcare, and part of that legislation also supports, funding for childcare. And often we hear the story of you can't get childcare without work, and you can't get work without childcare. And so, there are all these peripheral factors that aren't just related to being able to be stably housed, but the fact that, again, we make these systems so complicated for families to access that I think it's also, organizations that have specialties in these different areas, whether it's workforce or, reentry, that we really have to think about how we can coordinate locally to improve those experiences and systems for families, because it's hard on the families. It's also hard for the providers who are trying to do all the connecting. And so if there are ways that groups can work together more closely to coordinate those systems and be more collaborative, and I know we have different, groups that meet on these things pretty regularly, the sooner we can do that, I think that'll make it so much easier for families to not just navigate the system better, but get the support they need a lot more quickly.
I agree. Making it easier for us to go through that process would be a big help, or having someone to help guide us, because there are so many different applications for different things, and you fill out one application thinking it's one thing and it's not, it's for something else. And it can really bog you down, and it can make you depressed and make you think, I'm never going to get this. This is never going to happen for me. And so when you get depressed, you just kind of give up sometimes. And that's horrible, because I know I did it. I gave up for a minute, and then I was like, nope, get back on this horse. And I was lucky I had help and guidance. I think that's something that we, everyone should be able to have, in some way, shape, or form, is someone to guide them through all of these papers and, who do I speak to about this specific thing and this specific thing. And the other thing is the housing issue is just, there are places that take Section 8 or do income-based. There aren't enough of them. We have so many people that have vouchers, and there are so many places that are full, and their waiting lists are like a year long. And you get 2 months, maybe 3 months to get your place with your voucher. And if you don't, you lose it. And that's kind of hard. So maybe some way to work on having more housing, people be willing to offer people Section 8, the private landlords, something to help us get more of us out of these shelters and into homes would be awesome.
Does anyone else have any? Oh, go ahead, Veronica.
I feel like advocacy could even start in the grassroots and direct participation with services and providers. Shelters have needs. Call shelters to see in-depth needs they have. Volunteer in the community. Just staying up on the policies Katherine was talking about. These direct things you could do in everyday practice are really important to affect everyday life in families who are experiencing homelessness right now. So just reach out to those directly in the community that serves them just to see what they need, how you can support, and I think that's a good start as well.
One of the things that I know is difficult for school systems is identification of students that are McKinney-Vento. And a lot of times it's because the parents themselves don't know that they're eligible for McKinney-Vento. So I think an awareness of what that means in the community, I think would be really helpful. Understanding that you don't have to be living in a car or living in a shelter to be eligible for services. You could be, staying at a friend's house or couch surfing, making that a more better understanding kind of the definition overall in services. I think that, if people are working with families or with youth, that they are knowledgeable on what is available to those families, and that they're able to kind of refer them to the schools, because there's so much that the school systems can help with, but only if they're aware of the needs of the families.
Thank you, everyone, for answering. And just as a recap for our call to action for those who are on the call, call your reps and tell them to say yes to the new bill that is coming out. Pressure local government regarding landlord evictions, with social policies and issues with funding with childcare. Make sure that you are putting that up to the forefront. Making the process easier and having guidance on applications, because as Crystal and Norris said, there are several applications, and trying to figure out which one is the best one for you and your family. Access to more housing, even with private landlords, and then grassroots advocacy, volunteering at shelters, supporting direct needs. We all can do that. And awareness of McKinney-Vento for families and services. I just want to say, share your reactions right now to this amazing and dynamic panelist. And I want to say thank you for sharing your experience and your experience in the community. So right now, share your reactions, your claps, your celebrations, your hearts. I would love for that to be shown for our panelists today. Okay, at this time, we will take a few moments to look at the chat box for any questions from the panelists. And one question that I did see is, it's missed it. Hold on one second. Let me scroll back up. I think this was from, hold on. Now I don't see it anymore. Okay, here it is. What about those who apply for TANF and was rejected due to the child tax income that they receive?
I'm assuming that's about Medicaid eligibility. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I say not only is it difficult to navigate the system, but that the policies and things change so quickly sometimes. It's like people don't even know. So I think, in that case, they're looking at it as, yep, you have this income now, so therefore you're good. And we know that an extra few $1,000s or whatever it is not enough to justify a complete loss of other benefits. So some of those things we don't really have control over as an agency. There are things that are handed down from federal policy that we have to kind of deal with the ramifications of. But I think there are things we're trying to work toward to make that better, because we only have control over so many things. So the things we do have control over, what can we do to make that easy for low-income families? And so that's something we're working toward, but some things just get handed to us like that, and we have to try and work around it. So I think that's something that we'll try to do better at preempting long-term. But yeah, sometimes we're dealt those things and have to be the bearers of bad news, and then people get mad at the agency when we are doing what we're told to do. So I completely empathize with that frustration. That's exactly what we see all the time and continual evolving. So when we talk about the advocacy piece, that's the stuff that we need folks to get loud about, because we can fuss at people about that all the time, but when it's coming from people in the community, they actually tend to take that more seriously sometimes than us telling them, like, we keep seeing this problem, what can we do about it? So I would just continue to encourage folks to speak out, especially if you're a provider, about how we can change things in that way.
Thank you. And before we close, I want to go back. I know some people were a little late to the conversation, but go back to the exercise we did earlier. So at this time, if everyone can just close their eyes and use your imagination for a moment, and maybe this is your reality. Think about a time where you were hungry. Were you able to grab something really quick to eat, but did you not know where your next meal was coming from? Think about a time where you had nowhere to go, no home, no shelter, no family. Did you simply just get a room at a hotel for the night? Or did you sleep in your car or crashed at a friend's house? Think about a time where you had to decline a much needed raise at your job because you will lose out on the benefits that you receive. Think about a time where you didn't have transportation or couldn't obtain your ID, social security card, or medical documents. You can open your eyes now. Again, this is a small glimpse of what families are experiencing being homeless, but it's not limited to. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. If you want to learn more and get involved or support our collective work, please check us out at chipnd.org. Please also mark your calendars and join us for our annual celebration awards on January 26, 2022. Panelists, if you can stay on for a quick debrief, that would be great. Again, thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you.